Sarah's last candle stub died at dawn, wax pooling over her mother's wedding ring, the envelope sealed, rent paid with the only gold that ever mattered. The auction platform stank of yesterday's cattle blood despite fresh sawdust. Sarah signed her name in the ledger, ink splattering from the worn nib. The other women sold quick seamstress for $8, cook for $6. "Sarah Mitchell," the auctioneer called, already wiping sweat. "Young woman, can read and figure." $2. No takers. $1.50. Silence. $1. Someone spat tobacco juice into a tin bucket. 75 cents. The auctioneer's hammer struck wood like coffin nails. 50 cents. Her boot heel caught a loose board, wobbling with each breath. 27 cents. The crowd laughed. Sarah's spine straightened with each penny lost, growing taller as her worth shrank. Then she saw him, a stranger at the back, knuckles white on his hat brim, watching her like she was someone's sister. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Thomas Reed's mule threw its shoe on the rutted Denver road. The smithy's forge sat cold Sabbath. He'd have to wait until tomorrow. The bell rang while he was unloading pine planks. Not the fire bell's rapid clang, but steady, measured, like church, except wrong. He followed the crowd streaming toward the town square, sawdust still clinging to his work shirt. The platform stood where they usually sold cattle. Fresh sawdust covered rust-brown stains. Women lined up beside it, eyes fixed on nothing. Men clustered in groups, passing flasks, checking pocket watches. 27 cents, the auctioneer called out. The woman on the platform, young, maybe 25, traced circles on her skirt. Index finger moving in loops, circles within circles, endless. Thomas's throat closed. Elizabeth had done that. Same pattern on her deathbed quilt, hour after hour, until her fingers went still. 25 cents. Gentlemen, young woman can read, write, and figure. Banker Morrison stood in the front row, same man who'd foreclosed on the Hendricks place last month. The Millers before that. He examined the woman like lumber, checking for warp and rot. 20 cents. The woman's jaw moved, grinding teeth. Elizabeth had done that too, those last weeks. Said it kept the screaming inside. Thomas counted the woman's blinks. 7 between each price drop, precise as clockwork. Her boot heel caught a loose board, made the platform wobble. She didn't shift her weight to stop it, let it rock with each breath. 15 cents. Mrs. Henderson laughed, whispered to Mrs. Bauer. Something about certain types and where she belongs. The letter in Thomas's breast pocket weighed like stone. 2 years carrying Elizabeth's last words. They pretend I'm furniture. Thomas. Something to move around until I break. 10 cents. Going once. The woman's spine straightened. The lower the price, the taller she stood, like she was growing roots through the platform, down into earth that didn't want her. Going twice. Thomas's knuckles ached from gripping his hat. The felt crushed under his fingers. He forced his hands to relax, muscle by muscle. Morrison pulled out his pocket watch, checked the time. Bored. The woman saw it too. Her circles stopped. 5 cents, then, final call. Thomas moved through the crowd. They parted like he was hauling timber automatic. Unthinking, his boots struck packed dirt, each step deliberate. He had $1 silver in his pocket. Carson City Mint, 1878. But he wasn't buying anything. He wasn't. Thomas's boots struck the platform boards. The wood groaned under his weight-green lumber, not properly dried. Wood warped by winter. The auctioneer's mouth hung open. Gavel suspended midair. Thomas pulled the silver dollar from his pocket. Carson City Mint, 1878. Eagle worn smooth from handling. He set it on the podium beside the ledger. The coin rang against wood, clear as church bell. For her time wasted. The auctioneer's face flushed red from collar to hairline. Now see here. Thomas turned to the woman. Sarah Mitchell, The ledger said. Ink stains marked her fingers, permanent under the nails. Accountant's hands. Need someone who can figure. You know numbers. She blinked. Once. Not the mechanical 7 count from before. Her weight shifted. Platform board creaking. 3 years keeping books at Garrett's before it burned. Garrett's General Store. The fire last spring that took half of Market Street. Thomas remembered the smoke column visible from his mill, black against morning sky. This ain't how it works. The auctioneer's gavel struck wood. There's procedures. Forms. She's registered for auction. Then change how it works. The crowd pressed closer. Mrs. Henderson's fan snapped shut. Morrison's watch chain caught sunlight as he stepped forward. Reed, you can't just... Can't what? Thomas kept his eyes on Sarah Mitchell. Offer employment. Last I checked, this was still free territory. Sarah's fingers had stopped tracing circles. They hung straight at her sides, knuckles sharp under skin. The platform wobbled with her breathing that loose board she wouldn't fix. The registration fee's been paid, the auctioneer said. $2 to the town treasury, non-refundable. Thomas reached for his wallet. The leather cracked as it opened, needed oiling. He pulled out 2 more silver dollars, set them beside the first. There's your fee, plus 1 for your trouble. It's not about money. Sarah Mitchell moved. Her hand reached out, picked up the first silver dollar, the Carson City one. She held it up to the light, eagle toward the sun. First week's wages in advance. She handed it back to Thomas. The gesture cut through the crowd's murmur like a saw through soft pine. Not taking charity. Claiming payment for work not yet done. The difference mattered. Morrison laughed. You can't be serious. This woman is... Is what? Sarah's voice carried despite its quietness. Educated, experienced in bookkeeping, able to calculate interest rates in my head faster than you can with paper. Morrison's mouth worked like a landed fish. Mrs. Henderson gasped loud enough to scare pigeons from the courthouse roof. The auctioneer raised his gavel again. This is highly irregular. So is selling women like cattle. Thomas pulled out his freight manifest, unfolded it on the podium. But here we are. I need a bookkeeper. She needs employment. Simple transaction. Sarah studied the manifest. Her finger traced down the columns, board feet of lumber, prices per 1,000, delivery dates. The ink stains on her fingers matched the ledger's entries. Same brand of ink. Probably. Garrett's old stock. Your multiplication's wrong. She tapped the third line. 37 board feet at 12 cents should be $4.44, not $4.40. Thomas looked where she pointed. She was right. 4 cents might not seem like much, but over a season it added up. His previous bookkeeper had been drinking heavy toward the end before Thomas finally let him go. When do I start? Sarah asked. Now, if you're willing. The platform creaked as Sarah turned toward the stairs. Her patched dress caught on a splinter. She pulled it free without looking, the fabric tearing slightly. Another mend for tonight, probably the 20th on that dress. Thomas didn't move to help her down. Didn't offer his hand or arm. He waited. Sarah hiked her skirt, showing worn boots with newspapers stuffed in the split sole. She took the first step down, then the second. The crowd watched, silent now except for Morrison's heavy breathing. Her feet touched ground. Real ground, not auction platform. She smoothed her skirt, adjusted the cameo brooch at her throat. Good quality once. The silver tarnished now. My belongings are at Mrs. Henley's boarding house, she said. 1 trunk? We'll get it. They walked through the crowd together, not arm in arm like a couple, not him leading and her following like owner and property, side by side with 3 feet between them. The space of equals conducting business. The crowd parted, some from surprise, others from confusion. Mrs. Henderson's fan fluttered faster. Morrison's watch snapped shut hard enough to crack crystal. Behind them, the auctioneer still held his gavel raised. The other women waited in line, eyes forward, trying not to hope for their own interruption. Thomas's wagon sat loaded with fresh-cut pine, the smell sharp in morning air. His thrown shoe mule stood patient in the smithy's yard next door. Sarah stopped beside the wagon, looking at the lumber. Douglas fir, ponderosa pine. Thomas ran his hand along a board. See the grain pattern tighter than fir, better for structural work. Sarah touched the wood, careful, testing for splinters. Her fingers found a knot, traced its whorl. I'll need to see your books, she said. All of them, including the old ones your previous keeper bungled. 6 months' worth, maybe more. I'll need a workspace, lamp oil, ink, good pens, not those split nibs the town sells. There's a cabin, lock on the door. Sarah's hand stilled on the pine board. Lock, Yale and town, latest model. You'll have the only key. The morning sun hit the auction platform behind them. Empty now except for the auctioneer's podium and that 75-cent ledger entry beside Sarah Mitchell's name. But Thomas noticed Sarah's shoulders drop slightly, like she'd been carrying invisible weight. He untied the mule's lead rope. We should go. Long ride to the mill. Sarah climbed onto the wagon bed, not the bench seat beside him, but in back with the lumber. She sat on a grain sack, back straight, hands folded over her patched skirt. Mr. Reed. He looked back at her. What happened to your previous bookkeeper? Thomas wrapped the lead rope around his hand, the hemp rough against his calluses. Drank himself to death. Lonely work, keeping books in the mountains. Sarah's fingers found a pine board again, testing its surface. I don't drink. I know. How could you know that? He clicked his tongue at the mule, starting them forward. The wagon wheels creaked, needing grease. Your hands don't shake. Drunks' hands always shake in the morning. Behind them, the auctioneer's gavel finally fell. The sound echoed off buildings like an axe on dead wood. Next up, the auctioneer called, voice carrying across the square. Mary Watson, seamstress, 22 years old. Sarah's knuckles went white, gripping the wagon's side rail. The wagon wheels ground against granite fragments in the road. Each rotation marked distance from town, the mercantile shrinking, church steeple disappearing behind cottonwoods, last house becoming a speck. Sarah sat among the lumber, spine pressed against pine boards that leaked resin in the heat. Thomas Reed hadn't spoken since they'd collected her trunk from Mrs. Henley's. The landlady had counted the coins from Sarah's envelope twice, bit the gold ring to test it, then slammed the door. The trunk mother's originally. Leather cracked and brass corners green with age barely weighed 40 pounds. Everything Sarah owned. The road climbed. Ponderosa pines replaced cottonwoods. The air thinned, carried sharp scent of pitch and something else sawdust. Fresh cut wood. Sarah's dress stuck to her back with sweat despite the altitude's cooling. Thomas pulled the mule to a stop beside a creek. He climbed down, knees popping, and unhitched a tin cup from beneath the wagon seat. Water. He filled the cup, handed it up to her. The tin burned cold against her palms. She drank upstream from where the mule had waded in. Water so clear she could count pebbles on the bottom. Snowmelt. Probably. Her teeth ached from the cold. Thomas refilled the cup for himself, drank facing away from her. His shirt showed salt lines from dried sweat. Wood shavings clung to his collar. When he turned back, he held out his hand for the cup. Sarah passed it down. Their fingers didn't touch. Back on the road, the wagon lurched over exposed roots. Sarah gripped the side rails, splinters digging into her palms. The landscape changed again, granite outcroppings, lodgepole pines growing twisted from wind. A hawk circled overhead, shadow crossing the wagon bed like a mark. The sound hit first. Rhythmic chunk 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 of axes on wood. Then the smell sawdust thick enough to taste, mixed with coal smoke and tar. The road curved, and the operation spread before them. Not a homestead, a full lumber camp. 3 buildings formed a rough triangle around a central yard. A massive saw pit dominated one side. 2-man saw suspended above it. Stacks of logs, some thick as wagon wheels, lined the clearing's edge. A season's worth at least, maybe more. Equipment shed with doors thrown open showed tools hanging precise as surgery instruments. Everything organized, maintained, profitable. Thomas stopped the wagon beside the smallest building. Unpainted wood, tar paper roof, single window with real glass. He climbed down, walked to the door, drew a key from his pocket brass, new looking. Outhouse is there. He pointed to a structure 20 yards behind the cabin. Dig a new pit every 6 months. Current one's fresh last week. He walked to the cabin door, inserted the key, turned it. The lock clicked open. He removed the key, held it out to her. Sarah climbed down from the wagon. Her legs shook from 4 hours of holding steady against the lumber. She took the key. The metal warmed quick in her palm. Cabin's yours. Lock works from inside. I've got the only other key, for emergencies, fire and such. Sarah pushed the door open. Single room, maybe 12 by 14 feet. Bed frame with straw-tick mattress. Wool blanket folded at the foot. Table, 2 chairs. Wood stove, newer model with nickel trim. Shelves on one wall. Coal oil lamp on the table. Wick already trimmed. Workshop's there. Thomas pointed to the largest building. I sleep in the back room of it. Equipment shed's there. Saw pit you can see. He walked back to the wagon, lifted Sarah's trunk like it weighed nothing, set it inside her cabin door, stepped back out immediately, didn't cross the threshold. Books are in the workshop. Previous keeper's desk is there too. You'll see the mess he left. Sarah stood in her doorway, key still in her hand, the weight of it unfamiliar. In 3 years at Mrs. Henley's, she'd never had a key. At home before Father died, no locks at all. Mother said locks meant you had something worth stealing. I'll need ink, she said. Good quality. The cheap stuff fades. There's a list on the desk. Write what you need. I go to town monthly for supplies. Lamp oil, too, and pen nibs. Steel. Not those brass ones that split. Thomas nodded. He walked to the workshop, disappeared inside. Came back with a ledger, thick as a Bible. Set it on the doorstep, backed away. Last 6 months. There's 2 more books in the desk, going back further. Sarah picked up the ledger, opened it to a random page. The handwriting deteriorated as pages progressed neat copperplate to barely readable scrawl, numbers that didn't align, calculations scratched out, rewritten, wrong both times. Your multiplication on that manifest, she said. You knew it was wrong. Suspected. But you let me correct it. Why? Thomas looked at the saw pit. 2 men were working there now. Steady rhythm of the blade. Needed to know if you'd catch it. And if you'd say so. And if I hadn't, then you'd be on your way back to town. Sarah closed the ledger. The binding cracked. Needed repair. When do you want these corrected? Soon as accurate. I ship lumber end a month. Need to know real numbers, not fiction. I'll need 3 days just to review, another 2 to reconcile. Take what time you need. Thomas started toward the workshop, stopped, reached into his pocket, pulled out coins, set them on the doorstep like he'd set the ledger. Silver dollars. 3 of them. Week's wages. Advance, like you said. Sarah looked at the coins. One was the Carson City dollar from the auction. Eagle worn but visible. That's more than bookkeepers make. It's what I pay for accurate work. He turned away again. Dinner's at sunset. I'll leave a plate on the step. Knock when it's there. He walked to the workshop, broad back disappearing through the doorway. The saw pit rhythm continued. Somewhere a hammer rang on metal. Normal sounds of working men, except for the silence where conversation should be. Sarah picked up the coins, went inside her cabin, set them on the table. The door closed solid. She turned the key. The lock engaged with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Through the window, she watched Thomas exit the workshop carrying a plate covered with checkered cloth. He set it on her doorstep, knocked twice on the doorframe, walked away without looking back. Sarah waited until he'd entered the workshop again. Opened the door, retrieved the plate. Venison stew, still steaming, cornbread with real butter. More food than she'd seen in a week at Mrs. Henley's. She ate at the table. Ledger open beside her plate. The numbers swam exhaustion. Not confusion, but in the columns of wrong figures. She began to see patterns. The previous bookkeeper hadn't just been drunk. He'd been stealing. Small amounts, concealed in calculation errors. Thomas probably suspected, maybe even knew, but hadn't said anything. Sarah looked through her window at the workshop. Lamplight glowed in the back room window. Thomas's shadow moved across it. Then stillness. She opened the ledger to the first page. January's entries. Started checking each calculation, marking corrections in pencil. The work familiar as breathing. But something nagged at her awareness like a splinter working deeper. The camp was too quiet. No voices from the workers. No laughter from the saw pit. No songs or jokes or arguments. Just tools on wood, boots on dirt, breath in the thin air. She'd traded one kind of auction for another. But what exactly had Thomas Reed purchased with his silver dollars? The lamplight in his window went out. Darkness pressed against her window glass. Sarah found the error that revealed everything. December's entries, before the bookkeeper's writing went to hell. A payment received from Morrison's bank, for lumber never delivered. Marked as credit for future shipment, but there was no future shipment recorded, and Morrison, who'd stood at that auction ready to buy her for cents, his signature authorized the payment. Thomas Reed had known about the theft, had let it continue. Why? Unless he'd been waiting for something. Or someone. Sarah set down her pencil. Through the window. The workshop stood dark and quiet as a held breath. 3 weeks. Sarah's fingers knew every page of the ledgers, now the watermark in the paper, the smell of cheap ink turning brown at the edges. She'd found 47 calculation errors. 12 were honest mistakes. The rest weren't. Morrison's name appeared in margins, authorizing payments for phantom shipments. The previous bookkeeper had been smart about it, small amounts, spread across months. But drunk smart was still stupid. Patterns emerged once you looked. Sarah set down her pen. The corrected ledgers sat stacked on the desk, neat as gravestone rows. Nothing left to reconcile. Nothing left to calculate. Her purpose here complete. Technically. Through the window. She watched Thomas working a two-man saw alone. Back and forth. The blade singing through pine. Sawdust fountaining with each stroke. His shirt soaked through, clinging to the muscles working beneath. She'd watched him for days now. Through the crack where the cabin wall met the window frame, he worked with economy, no wasted motion, no hurry. The wood seemed to separate willingly under his hands, like it wanted to become something else. Sarah stood, her back cracked from hunching over numbers. The cabin felt smaller after 3 weeks. 4 walls and a lock weren't enough anymore. She needed something more than safety. Outside, the September air bit sharp. First hint of winter coming. Sarah walked to the workshop. Boot falls loud on packed dirt. The saw pit workers stopped their rhythm. Watched her pass. Still no talk between them. Just eyes tracking movement. Thomas stood at his workbench, running a plane along a board. Curls of pine spiraled from the blade, translucent as honey in the light through the window. He didn't look up when Sarah's shadow crossed the doorway. Teach me. Not a question. A statement of intent. Thomas's hand stilled on the plane. Wood shaving hung suspended from the blade like a stopped thought. You're paid for bookkeeping. Books are done, corrected back to January. There'll be more. Always more books. Sarah stepped into the workshop. Smell of pine sap, linseed oil, coal smoke from the stove. Tools hung on the walls, chisels, saws, planes, things she didn't have names for, each in its place. Handles worn smooth from use. Books don't build shelter. Thomas set down the plane, looked at her direct for the first time in 3 weeks. His eyes were gray, like weathered wood. Why? Sarah walked to the workbench, touched the board he'd been planing, smooth as silk one direction, grain catching her finger the other. My mother could sew, could have taught me, said knowing a trade meant you'd never starve, but she starved anyway. Froze. Actually, winter before last. Thomas picked up a different tool. Curved blade set in 2 handles. Spokes have, for rounding edges. He selected a piece of oak from the lumber rack, clamped it in the bench vise. Drew the spokes have toward him, blade biting shallow. A curl of oak peeled away, perfect as an angel's hair. Sarah reached for the tool. Thomas pulled it back. You'll ruin the blade, and the wood, and probably your hands. Then I'll ruin them. He studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him hand over the spokes have. The handles were warm from his grip, like holding reins, firm but not fighting. Sarah positioned the blade against the oak. Pulled. The tool dove deep, gouging ugly into the grain. The wood split along a fault line she hadn't seen. Again. Thomas unclamped the ruined piece, tossed it into the kindling box. Selected another. Identical oak, but he ran his hand along it first, feeling for something invisible. Sarah tried again. The blade skittered across the surface, catching nothing. You're fighting it. Thomas moved behind her, not touching, but close enough she could smell sawdust in his clothes. The wood has its own mind. You're just helping it along. 3rd piece. 4th. 5th. Each one ruined different, gouged, split, scraped uneven. Sarah's palms burned where the handles rubbed. Sweat ran down her spine despite the workshop's chill. 6th piece. She pulled the spokes half slow, feeling the blades angle through the handles. A ribbon of oak curled away. Not perfect, not even good, but intentional. Better. Thomas walked to the tool wall, selected another plane, this one smaller, brass fittings instead of iron. Block plane, for end grain. He demonstrated on a pine board. Quick passes, checking the surface with his palm between strokes. Set it aside, clamped a new piece for her. Sarah took the plane, heavier than expected. The blade caught wrong immediately, tearing instead of cutting. Her hands shook fatigue or frustration. She couldn't tell. They worked until sunset, tool after tool, wood after wood. The kindling box filled with Sarah's failures. Her palms blistered, burst, bled onto the handles. Thomas said nothing about the red stains on the tools, when darkness made the work impossible. He lit the coal oil lamp. In the yellow light, Sarah counted her damage. 14 blisters. 3 splinters embedded deep, knuckles swollen from gripping too hard. The spokes have had worn a groove in her palm where she'd held it wrong. Thomas brought a tin from a shelf, bear grease mixed with something that smelled like mint. For your hands. Sarah dipped her fingers in. The grease burned into the open blisters, then numbed them. She flexed her fingers, testing the damage. Same time tomorrow. Thomas was cleaning the tools, wiping away her blood with an oiled rag. Books first, then this, if you want. Sarah walked to the door, stopped. On the workbench lay the one piece she hadn't ruined. The 6th attempt with the spokes have, a small curve of oak, nothing useful, nothing beautiful, but hers. Can I take it? Thomas nodded without looking up from the tools. Sarah picked up the oak piece, smooth where she'd shaped it, rough where she hadn't. In her cabin, she set it on the table beside the corrected ledgers. Evidence of 2 different educations. Through her window, the workshop glowed with lamplight. Thomas's shadow moved methodical, hanging each tool in its place, sweeping sawdust into neat piles, movements she was beginning to memorize. Her hands throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Tomorrow they'd be worse, stiff, swollen, maybe infected if she wasn't careful. But tomorrow she'd hold the tools again, feel wood give way under her intent, build something from nothing. She unwrapped the grease-soaked bandage Thomas had given her, examined the damage in the lamplight. The blisters had a pattern, a map of where tools met flesh, where she'd fought instead of yielded. On the desk, the ledgers waited, tomorrow's entries to record, receipts to reconcile. But under the numbers now, she felt something else taking shape, like wood grain invisible until the plane revealed it. Sarah rewrapped her hands, tighter this time. Through the window, Thomas's workshop went dark. But she'd heard something just before the sound of wood being selected, set aside, for tomorrow's lesson. He'd already chosen the pieces she'd ruin next, except she recognized the sound now. Not just any wood being moved. Pine had had a particular note when it knocked against oak, and Thomas had no orders for pine furniture. She'd seen the books. So what was he building that wasn't in the ledgers? The wagon wheels stuck in frost-hardened ruts. October now. Mornings sharp enough to see breath. Sarah sat beside Thomas on the bench seat this time, not hiding in the wagon bed. The ledger wrapped in oilcloth lay across her lap. 3 months of corrected accounts. Every payment tracked, every debt recorded. Thomas hadn't asked her to come. She'd climbed onto the wagon while he was checking the axle grease. He'd looked at her once, at the ledger, then clicked his tongue at the mule to start. Town appeared through the pines. Church steeple first, then chimney smoke climbing straight in the still air. Sarah's hands tightened on the ledger. The last time she'd been here, she'd stood on that platform worth 27 cents. The general store sat on Main Street's corner. Pickle barrel by the door, same as always. Window display showing bolts of fabric no one could afford. Sarah recognized Mrs. Henderson's carriage parked outside, matched grays stamping against the cold. Thomas stopped the wagon, set the brake, wrapped the reins around the handle, climbed down, boots hitting packed dirt. Didn't offer to help Sarah down. She appreciated that more than any hand up. Inside, warmth from the potbelly stove hit like a wall. Mrs. Henderson stood at the fabric counter with Mrs. Bauer and Mrs. Clark. Their conversation stopped when the bell rang above the door. Sarah walked to the counter, set the ledger down with enough force to rattle the glass case displaying tobacco tins. The store owner, Mr. Garrett, nephew of the Garrett whose store burned, looked up from his credit book. Miss Mitchell, his Adam's apple bobbed. Didn't expect. The lumber camp needs supplies. Sarah opened the ledger to her prepared list. 50 pounds of flour, 20 of sugar, 10 of coffee beans, salt pork, 30 pounds, coal oil, 5 gallons. The women at the fabric counter whispered, not trying to hide it. Words carrying clear reads woman and shameful and certain kind. Mr. Garrett's pencil scratched against paper. That's considerable. I'll need payment in check the account. Sarah flipped the ledger to July's pages. Reed Lumber has $43 credit. Credit. For lumber delivered not paid. 3 shipments. Sarah ran her finger down the columns. July 7th, $12.50. July 19th, $15 even. August 2nd, $15.50. Garrett pulled his own ledger closer, pages rustling as he searched. His face reddened as he found the entries. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Sarah turned to September's pages. Additional credit of $18 for the premium pine Morrison ordered but never collected. That's $61 total credit. Mrs. Henderson's fan snapped open, the sound like bones breaking. Perhaps, Mrs. Henderson said, voice pitched to Carrie. Mr. Garrett prefers not to serve certain types of customers. Sarah didn't turn around, kept her finger on the ledger entry. Then perhaps Mr. Garrett prefers not to receive payment for his debts. Garrett's wife emerged from the back room, hands flour-dusted from the morning's baking. She looked between Sarah and the society women, calculating something behind her tight smile. Now, Mrs. Garrett, Mrs. Henderson said, Surely you maintain standards about who? I maintain standards about paying bills. Mrs. Garrett wiped her hands on her apron, leaving white streaks. Show me the list. Miss Mitchell? Sarah slid the paper across. Mrs. Garrett read it, nodded. William, start filling this order. But Martha, $61 credit buys considerable supplies. Mrs. Garrett's voice could have frozen the pickle brine. Unless you'd rather explain to the bank why we can't make this month's payment. Garrett's shoulders sagged. He pulled the flour barrel forward, started scooping into a sack. The scales creaked as he weighed, brass marker swinging toward 50 pounds. Mrs. Bauer stepped forward. This is inappropriate. That woman shouldn't be what? Sarah turned now, faced them direct. Educated, employed, able to calculate interest rates faster than your husbands can steal them. Mrs. Henderson's fan snapped shut. How dare? I dare because I can read. Sarah opened the ledger to December's entries. Last year, before she'd arrived. Morrison authorized payment for lumber never delivered. Your husband, Mrs. Henderson, co-signed. Fraud. Technically. Sheriff might be interested. The women's faces drained white as fresh flour. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. Thomas stood by the door, studying a display of hammers like they were fascinating, not intervening, not rescuing, just present if needed. The supplies, Sarah said to Garrett, who'd frozen mid-scoop. All of them. Now. Garrett filled sacks. Sugar, coffee, salt pork wrapped in brown paper. Each item weighed precise, recorded in his ledger and hers. The only sounds were the scales creak and coal shifting in the stove. Mrs. Henderson gathered her skirts. Come, ladies. The air in here has become unpleasant. They swept past Sarah, wide enough to avoid contamination. The bell jangled their exit. Through the window, Sarah watched them cluster beside the carriage, heads together like crows on carrion. Mrs. Garrett carried out the coal oil cans, metal sloshing with each step. Don't mind them. Money talks louder than gossip. Eventually. I don't need their approval. No. Mrs. Garrett set the cans on the counter. But you might need allies. Town's small. Memories are long. Sarah closed the ledger. So are account books. Mr. Garrett tallied the order. Subtracted from the credit. $17.30 remaining credit. Applied to next month. Sarah watched him record it. In writing, both ledgers. Thomas moved then. Started carrying sacks to the wagon. Garrett helped, eager now to fill the order complete. Sarah supervised the loading, checking each item against her list. The wagon sat lower when loaded, axles creaking. Thomas checked the tie-downs, tested the weight distribution, professional, methodical, like this was any supply run, not Sarah's first victory in a war she hadn't asked to fight. Anything else? Garrett stood in his doorway, trying to look accommodating instead of defeated. Sarah climbed onto the wagon seat. We'll need nails next month. 10 penny. 4 kegs. Add it to the list. The ride out of town felt different. Sarah sat straight instead of rigid. The ledger on her lap felt lighter despite its unchanged weight. Behind them, curtains twitched in windows. Let them look. Let them whisper. The camp's accounts were clean. Morrison's theft documented. The Hendersons' involvement proven. She had evidence. Carefully copied and stored. Power measured in ink and numbers instead of social standing. You knew, Sarah said when town disappeared behind pines. About Morrison and Henderson. The stolen payments. Thomas kept his eyes on the road. Suspected. But you didn't act on it. Wasn't my place. Books weren't mine to question. But now they are. Mine. Yes. The mule's ears flicked at a jay's harsh call. Thomas adjusted the reins, guiding around a washout from last week's rain. What else did the previous bookkeeper hide? Thomas's hands tightened on the leather, just slightly. Anyone else would have missed it. Check November's entries. 2 years back. Sarah waited, but he said nothing more. They rode in silence broken only by creaking wheels and the mule's steady breathing. The sun climbed toward noon, shadows shortening beneath the pines. At camp, the saw pit workers stopped to help unload. Still no conversation, just efficiency of motion. Sarah carried the ledger inside, set it on the desk, opened to November, 2 years ago. The entries looked normal at first. Lumber shipped, payments received. Then she found it. A name in the margin, almost like an afterthought. Elizabeth Reed, payment of $30, for what no service listed, no product delivered. Below it, in the previous bookkeeper's deteriorating handwriting, Morrison arranged, don't question. Sarah traced the name with her finger. Elizabeth Reed. Thomas's sister. The one who'd traced circles on her deathbed quilt. $30. The same amount Morrison had authorized for phantom lumber shipments. The same amount Thomas had put on the auction platform that day. Not coincidence. Payment. But for what? Through the window. Thomas split wood for winter, each swing precise, powerful, the axe blade catching light before it fell. What had Morrison bought from Elizabeth Reed, and why had Thomas waited until now to investigate? Sarah pulled November's loose pages free, spread them across the desk. More entries in the margins, partially erased but still visible if you angled them to the light. Elizabeth's name appearing 3 more times. Always $30. Always Morrison's authorization. The last entry was dated 2 days before Thomas's letter, the one he still carried. 2 days before Elizabeth died. Sarah set down the pages. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from cold. Outside. Thomas's axe struck wood with mechanical precision, splitting things apart to see what lay inside. Just like she was doing with these books. But some things, once split, couldn't be made whole again. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty glass, illuminating the ledger's pages. All those numbers, all those secrets, waiting to be calculated. What exactly had Morrison been buying, and why did Thomas need an outsider to find what he already suspected? The barometer dropped all morning. 29 inches, 28.7, 28.4. Thomas kept checking it, mercury silver against yellowed paper. Sarah watched him from the desk where she worked November's accounts from 2 years back. Lightning flashed far off. She counted. 12 seconds until thunder rolled through the valley. 2 miles, maybe less. The air tasted like copper pennies. Thomas stood at the workshop door, studying the sky. Black clouds stacked like cordwood against the peaks. Wind bent the pines sideways, showing their pale undersides. How much lumber outside? Sarah checked her ledger. 4,000 board feet of green pine, just delivered yesterday. Worth be $40 if it stays dry, nothing if it warps. Thomas grabbed a tarpaulin from the wall, canvas thick as saddle leather, waterproofed with linseed oil and white lead. Need to move it all under shelter. The first fat raindrops hit the dirt as they ran outside. The lumber sat stacked in the open, fresh-cut boards already drinking moisture from the air. Each board 12 feet long, 40 pounds wet. 4,000 board feet meant over 300 pieces. Thomas threw the tarpaulin aside, no time for covering. Had to move everything to the equipment shed. Sarah grabbed the end of a board. Splinters drove through her work gloves immediately. They carried it running, drops becoming sheets of water. Thunder cracked directly overhead. No counting needed, the storm was here. Back for another board. Another. Sarah's dress soaked through, heavy as chainmail. Her boots slipped in mud, forming instant rivers. The board slipped, scraped down her shin. She grabbed it again, kept moving. Thomas worked opposite her, matching her rhythm. No words, the storm ate sound anyway. Just motion, urgent and necessary. Board after board, their path wearing a groove in the dirt. Lightning struck the ridge above camp. the flash printed white against Sarah's closed eyelids. In that moment of blindness, she saw Thomas's face, not scared of the storm, but watching her. The same recognition from the auction. Seeing someone who wouldn't quit. Her gloves tore on the 20th board. Blood mixed with rain, making her grip slippery. She wiped her palms on her soaked dress, grabbed the next board. Thomas saw the blood. She caught him looking. He said nothing, just worked faster. The stack shrinking, the shed filling. Sarah's back screamed. Her torn hands burned. Rain drove sideways now, each drop a cold needle. She slipped, went down on one knee in the mud. The board's weight drove her down further. Thomas appeared beside her, took the board's weight, not helping her up but giving her space to stand. She pushed herself upright, grabbed her end again. They carried it together to the shed. Halfway through the stack, Sarah couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Couldn't tell if she was gripping or if the boards just balanced on her palms. Thunder continuous now, one crack rolling into the next. "My sister," Thomas said suddenly, voice barely audible over the storm. Had to lean close to hear. "She died because the town said she was ruined." Sarah grabbed another board. The words registered, but she didn't respond. Couldn't. The lumber mattered now. Stories could wait. Another trip. Another. Her dress tore at the shoulder seam. Cold rain hit bare skin. She kept moving. "Morrison," Thomas continued, like he had to say it now or never. "Found her working at Mrs. Henley's. Not boarding, working." Sarah knew what kind of work. The kind that killed women slow from the inside out. The kind her mother had considered before choosing hunger instead. Lightning struck closer. A pine 100 yards away exploded. The sound like cannon fire. Burning wood smell mixed with rain. $30, Sarah said, understanding now. Morrison paid 30 each time, until she couldn't anymore. Then nothing. They worked faster, the lumber pile diminishing. But so was their strength. Sarah's legs shook with each trip. Her torn hands left red smears on the pine. "My mother," Sarah heard herself say, "sold what she had to. Fed us 3 years that way. Not her body, her knowledge. Teaching bankers' sons their letters and numbers. Late at night when wives wouldn't know. Reputation ruined anyway, might as well earn from it. Until the consumption took her voice, then her breath." Thomas grabbed a board. Sarah grabbed the other end. They carried it through mud now ankle deep, the workshop flooding, water running through like a creek. "Morrison knew," Thomas said. "Morrison always knows." 3 more trips, 5, 10. Sarah lost count. Existed only in the motion bend, lift, carry, stack. Her body moved without her mind's permission. Pure mechanism now. The last board. They carried it together, set it in the shed, gentle as a sleeping child. Sarah's knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, hand leaving a bloody print on the wood. Thomas pulled the shed door shut, dropped the bar across. The lumber safe. Dry. Protected. $40 saved. More than Sarah had been worth on that platform. They stood in the rain, breathing hard. Sarah's torn dress clung transparent. She didn't care. Modesty seemed absurd after what they'd just done. Thomas's shirt showed every muscle beneath, working as his chest heaved. The storm's fury breaking now. Rain becoming drizzle, thunder rolling away east, leaving only the sound of water dripping from eaves. "Inside," Thomas said. The workshop felt warm after the cold rain. Thomas stoked the stove, added pine kindling that caught immediately. He brought a basin, filled it from the water barrel, set it on the workbench. Sarah peeled off her ruined gloves. Her palms looked like meat, raw, bleeding, embedded with splinters too many to count. She plunged them into the water. Pink bloomed through clear. Thomas added his hands to the basin. His were bleeding too, though not as bad. They stood side by side, hands in the same water, blood mixing invisible in the pink. "Thank you," he said. "It's my job. Protecting the assets. Not that." "Oh." He lifted his hands from the water, reached for a clean rag. For not pitying her. Or me. Sarah understood. Pity was another kind of auction, another way of setting value on someone's pain. She lifted her own hands, water running red down her wrists. Thomas handed her a rag. Their fingers brushed first time they'd touched since that day at the platform. His skin felt like bark, rough and warm. The books, Sarah said. November 2 years ago. Elizabeth's name appears 4 times. I know. You've known all along. About Morrison, the payments, everything. Suspecting isn't knowing, and knowing isn't proving. Sarah wrapped the rag around her right palm. The cloth stuck to the raw flesh immediately. That's why you needed me. Someone outside it all. To find what you already knew existed. Thomas wrapped his own hands. Methodical. Practiced. Morrison owns the sheriff. The mayor, half the town council. But not the territorial marshal. Thomas looked at her sharp. No, not him. The ledgers prove fraud. Theft. Maybe more. Maybe. Sarah realized she was shivering. Her dress dripped steady on the floor, forming a puddle. Thomas noticed, went to the back room, returned with a wool blanket, held it out at arm's length. She took it, wrapped it around her shoulders. The wool scratched against her bare skin where the dress had torn. Warmth spreading slow, painful as her blood started moving again. What do you want to do? She asked. About Morrison. Thomas walked to the window, outside. The storm clouds broke apart. Late sun slanted through, turning everything gold and strange. The lumber shed stood solid, protecting their saved fortune. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing. Sometimes they are. Not if you want to live with yourself after. Sarah joined him at the window. The camp looked different, rain-washed, cleaner somehow, like the storm had scoured away more than dust. She saw the saw pit workers emerging from their quarters, checking equipment for damage. There's more, she said. In the ledgers, not just Elizabeth, other names, other women. Thomas's jaw tightened. How many? 7 that I've found, maybe more. The sun dropped behind the peaks. Shadows stretched long across the camp. Sarah realized she could see her breath temperature dropping fast after the storm. I need dry clothes, she said. Wait. Thomas went to his supply shelf, brought down the same tin of bear grease and mint. For your hands, before they stiffen. Sarah unwrapped the bloody rags. The wounds looked worse in lamplight, deep gouges, splinters still embedded, skin hanging in flaps. Thomas opened the tin, the mint smell sharp in the cooling air. This will hurt. I know. He dipped 2 fingers in the grease, held them above her palm. Ready. Sarah nodded. He spread the grease across her wounds. Fire shot up her arm. Her knees buckled again. Thomas caught her elbow with his free hand, steadied her, kept spreading the grease with the other. My sister's hands looked like this. After. When I found her. Sarah understood. Elizabeth had fought, clawed, tried to escape whatever Morrison had done, or had done to her. There's something else, Sarah said through gritted teeth as Thomas worked grease into her other palm. The dates. The payments to Elizabeth. They line up with shipments. What shipments? To Morrison's ranch. Special orders, not lumber. Thomas's hand stilled. What then? Sarah met his eyes, gray as the storm they'd just survived. Girls. Morrison was ordering girls. Through the auction, Elizabeth was marking which ones, arranging the sales. The tin slipped from Thomas's hand, hit the floor with a hollow ring. Bear grease splattered across the boards. Outside, full dark now. The saw pit workers' lanterns moved between buildings like fireflies, normal evening routines resuming. But inside the workshop, Thomas stood frozen as winter ice. She helped him. His voice barely a whisper. She had to. Look at the dates. The payment stopped when she stopped cooperating. Thomas bent, picked up the tin, set it careful on the workbench. his movements too controlled, like he was afraid of what would happen if he moved naturally. "How many girls?" Sarah wrapped her greased hands in fresh rags, the pain diminishing to a throb that matched her heartbeat. "The ledger shows 7, but Thomas—" She stopped. Through the window, a lantern bobbed along the road, not from the camp, from town. Moving fast, urgent. Thomas saw it too. His hand went to the rifle mounted above the door. "Stay here," he said. But Sarah recognized the horse's gait, Mrs. Garrett's mare, the one with the white blaze. And that wasn't Mrs. Garrett riding too small, too young. It was Jenny Garrett, the owner's daughter, 15 years old. And her name was in Morrison's special orders, scheduled for next week's auction. Jenny Garrett slid from the mare's back before it stopped moving. Her nightdress tangled in the stirrup, she yanked it free. Tearing the hem, mud splattered up her bare legs. No shoes. Her feet bled from the road's rocks. "Please," she said. Nothing else. Just that word, over and over. Sarah dropped the blanket from her shoulders, wrapped it around the girl. Jenny shook hard enough to rattle teeth. Not from cold, from something worse. "Morrison," Jenny managed. "Tomorrow, Papa signed the papers for my auction registration." Thomas lowered the rifle. "Your parents know you're here. Mama sent me. Said run. Said come here." Sarah guided Jenny inside the workshop, set her on the bench. The girl's feet left bloody prints on the floor, glass cuts. Looked like. From a window. She'd climbed out through broken glass rather than use the door. "How much?" Sarah asked. Direct questions helped panic. What did Morrison offer? $100. To cancel Papa's debts. Sarah found clean rags, the water basin still pink from her own blood, started cleaning Jenny's feet. The girl didn't flinch, even when Sarah pulled out a glass shard long as a nail. Thomas stood by the door, watching the road. "Your mother. She'll pay for this. She said she doesn't care anymore. Said losing me would be worse." Sarah wrapped Jenny's feet. The girl's toes were white, bloodless from cold and fear. She rubbed them gentle, trying to bring back warmth. "The ledger," Sarah said to Thomas. "Get November's pages, 2 years back." Thomas brought the loose sheets. Sarah spread them on the workbench, angling them toward the lamplight. Jenny's name wasn't there too young then, but the pattern was. "Look," Sarah traced the entries. "Morrison pays $30 to certain girls, same amount each time. They disappear from town records after." "Where?" Jenny's voice small as a child's. Sarah checked the shipping logs, cross-referenced with Morrison's ranch orders. Denver, the railroad camps, mining towns. Understanding dawned on Jenny's face, the kind that aged someone 10 years in 10 seconds. Thomas walked to his back room, returned with clothes work shirt, canvas pants, suspenders, men's clothes, but clean and dry. "Change," he told Jenny. "Then we plan." While Jenny dressed behind a curtain, Sarah pulled out fresh paper, started writing. Every entry about Morrison, copied exact. Dates, amounts, names. Her hand cramped around the pen, wounds pulling with each letter. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked. "Evidence. For the territorial marshal." "That's 2 days' ride to Denver." "Then someone better start riding." Jenny emerged in the oversized clothes, sleeves rolled up 3 times, pants held up with rope. She looked younger, not older, a child playing dress-up. "I can't go back." "No," Sarah agreed. "You can't." Through the window, another light appeared on the road, then another. 3 lanterns now, moving fast. Thomas picked up the rifle again. Garrett figured out where she went, but Sarah recognized the lead rider's posture. Mrs. Garrett, riding astride like a man, skirts hitched up, Behind her, two more women. Mrs. Chen from the laundry, Mrs. Kowalski from the boarding house. They dismounted in the yard. Mrs. Garrett's face set hard as winter ground. "Where is she?" "Safe," Sarah said from the doorway. "Morrison's coming, with the sheriff, maybe 20 minutes behind." Mrs. Chen carried a carpet bag, thrust it at Sarah. "Jenny's things." "What matters anyway?" Mrs. Kowalski pulled papers from her coat. 3 more girls, signed up for next week's auction. Their mothers sent these. Sarah looked at the papers. Copies of registration forms, but altered. Names changed, dates shifted. Someone had been preparing. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked Mrs. Garrett. "About Morrison years? About what we could do about it?" "Since you stood up to them in my store." The workshop filled with women. Jenny in her corner, the mothers around the table. Sarah spread out all the ledgers, all the evidence. The lamp smoke thickened, making everyone's eyes water. 7 girls gone in 2 years, Sarah said. Maybe more before that. Lizzie Henderson's daughter, Mrs. Chen said. Told everyone she went to finishing school back east. The Paulson girl said she married a rancher in Wyoming. My neighbor's niece. Consumption, they claimed. Names accumulated, stories unraveled. The truth emerging like wood grain under a plane always there, just hidden under the surface. Hoofbeats on the road, many horses, moving fast. Back room, Thomas told Jenny. Now. The girl ran. Thomas barred the door behind her. The women didn't scatter, stood their ground, faces composed. They'd made their choice coming here. Sheriff Watson arrived first. Star on his vest, catching lamplight. Morrison behind him. Then 4 deputies, all armed, all dismounting with practiced ease. Tom Reed, the sheriff called. Need to discuss some stolen property. Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands, not aimed but ready. No stolen property here. Girl ran off from her rightful guardian. That's theft. She's 15, not property. Morrison pushed forward. Banker's suit even at night, gold watch chain glinting. I have papers, legal contracts, signed by her father. For what? Sarah stepped beside Thomas. Her purchase, her sale. Morrison's face tightened. Employment arrangement, all legal, like Elizabeth Reed's employment. The name hit Morrison like cold water. He stepped back, boots scraping gravel. Tom, your sister understood business. Don't sully her memory with... Thomas's rifle swung up, aimed now, centered on Morrison's chest. Say her name again, please. The sheriff's hand went to his pistol. The deputies spread out, covering angles. Sarah heard hammers cocking, leather creaking. Her torn hands throbbed with her racing heartbeat. The girl comes with us, the sheriff said. Or we take her anyway. Try, Thomas said. Sarah touched his arm, felt the muscle coiled underneath, ready for violence. But that wasn't the answer, not the lasting one. She held up the papers. Territorial marshal might be interested in these. Fraud, theft, interstate trafficking. Morrison laughed. Marshal's in Denver. 2 days away. 1 day, Sarah corrected. If someone left an hour ago, on a fast horse, like, say, Mr. Kowalski's racing mare. Morrison's eyes went to Mrs. Kowalski. The older woman smiled, gold tooth catching light. My husband left already. Midnight ride. Loves those. The sheriff looked between Morrison and the women, calculating odds, measuring consequences. This doesn't have to be complicated. No, Sarah agreed. It doesn't. Leave now. Forget the girl. Cancel next week's auction. Or, Sarah walked down the steps, closer to Morrison, close enough to smell his bay rum cologne over horse sweat. She held up the ledger, November's pages visible. Or everyone knows about the special orders, The payments? The girls? Morrison grabbed for the ledger. Sarah pulled it back, but his fingers caught the pages. They tore, scattered in the mud, evidence destroyed in seconds. Morrison smiled. What ledger? I don't see any proof. Sarah smiled back. Behind her, Jenny emerged from the workshop. In her hands, fresh pages, every entry copied in Sarah's careful script. I made duplicates, Jenny said. While you all were talking, Miss Sarah taught me. Said always keep copies of important documents. Mrs. Garrett held up more papers. We all have copies. Made them while our husbands slept. Mrs. Chen added hers. My cousin runs the Chinese newspaper in Denver. He'd find this interesting. Mrs. Kowalski pulled out a telegram form, already filled out. My brother works for Western Union. Messages sent an hour ago to newspapers in Denver, Cheyenne, and St. Louis. Morrison's face went white as fresh paper. The sheriff stepped back, distancing himself from the banker. You're lying. Sarah walked to the workshop wall, pulled down a carved wooden box from the shelf. Pine and cedar joined seamless, her maker's mark hidden in the grain. She opened it. Inside, telegrams, receipts, all stamped and dated. Tonight's date. Mr. Reed taught me woodworking, but I taught myself about preparation. The sheriff holstered his pistol. Slow, deliberate. Appears there's been a misunderstanding. Girl's 18. You say, free to choose her employment. 15. Thomas corrected. But yes, free. The sheriff nodded. Morrison, seems your papers are invalid. Girl was never registered proper. Watson, you worthless. Careful. The sheriff's hand returned to his gun. Insulting a lawman's a crime. Morrison looked between them all. Women he'd dismissed, ignored, used. Standing together now, holding papers that could destroy him. His hand went to his watch chain, a nervous gesture. This isn't over. Yes, Sarah said. It is. Morrison mounted his horse, yanked the reins hard enough to make the animal dance sideways. The deputies followed, confused but obedient. The sheriff last, touching his hat brim to the ladies. Evening, all. They waited until hoofbeats faded. Then Mrs. Garrett collapsed on the workshop steps, shaking. Mrs. Chen sat beside her. Mrs. Kowalski laughed, high and strange. Did we just— Yes, Sarah said. Jenny stood in the doorway, still holding the copies. Ink stained her fingers. What happens now? Thomas lowered his rifle. Now you disappear, until the marshal arrives. Where? Sarah looked at the workshop. The tools on the walls, the wood stacked and waiting. Here, you'll learn a trade, bookkeeping, maybe woodworking too. Morrison won't forget, Mrs. Garrett said. No, but he'll be too busy explaining to the marshal. Sarah picked up the torn pages from the mud, some still readable. These plus the copies will be enough. The women gathered their things, hugged Jenny, each whispering something in her ear. Promises, Sarah thought, or warnings. They mounted their horses, Mrs. Garrett struggling with her skirts. Thank you, she said to Sarah, for showing us how to fight back. You already knew, just needed permission. They rode away together, 3 lanterns bobbing through darkness, growing smaller until they merged with stars. Jenny stood between Thomas and Sarah, small in the oversized clothes, but standing straighter now. I don't know anything about wood. Neither did I, Sarah said. 3 months ago. Thomas walked inside, returned with the block plane, Sarah's first tool, the one she'd bled on learning to use. He handed it to Jenny. First lesson tomorrow, after the marshal leaves. Jenny held the plane like it might bite. What if I'm no good? Sarah showed her hands, scars on scars now, the fresh wounds from tonight layered over months of learning. You'll bleed. You'll ruin things. Then you'll learn. Jenny traced the plane's brass fittings. Morrison really trafficked those girls. Yes. Will the marshal stop him? Maybe. Or maybe Morrison will run. Either way, you're safe. But Jenny was looking at the workshop wall, at Sarah's carved box sitting on the shelf. You made that? Yes. It's beautiful. Sarah studied her work, joints tight as prayers, wood grain flowing like water. Her maker's mark hidden but present. It's functional. Beautiful is extra. Thomas started banking the stove. Jenny takes the cabin tonight. Sarah, you'll need the workshop back room. Sarah understood. They couldn't risk Jenny alone. Not yet. Morrison might return. Sheriff or not. What about you? I'll watch. He pulled a chair to the window facing the road, set the rifle across his lap. In case. Jenny went to the cabin, carrying her carpet bag and the lamp. Sarah watched her lock the door from inside, the sound of safety engaging. In the workshop's back room, Thomas's narrow bed stood against the wall, military corners on the single blanket, a Bible on the side table, pages marked with ribbon, Elizabeth's letters tied with string. Sarah sat on the bed's edge. Through the wall, she heard Thomas's chair creak as he settled in for the watch. Beyond that, Jenny moving in the cabin, probably crying now that she was alone. Tomorrow the marshal would come, or not. Morrison would run, or not. The auction would be canceled, or not. But tonight, 3 people who'd been valued in coins and contracts sat in buildings they'd earned. One keeping watch, one learning to breathe again, one thinking about the grain and wood and women, how pressure revealed its true direction. Sarah lay back on the narrow bed. It smelled like sawdust and Thomas pine sap and work sweat and something deeper, like earth after rain. Through the window, stars emerged as clouds cleared. The storm had passed but left everything changed, cleaner or just different. She couldn't tell. She thought about Elizabeth Reed, helping Morrison because she had to, stopping when she couldn't anymore. The $30 payments. The same amount Thomas had offered at Sarah's auction, not coincidence. Payment for payment, balance sought if not achieved. Sarah closed her eyes, heard Thomas's breathing through the thin wall, steady as sawing, heard Jenny's lamp blow out in the cabin, heard the wood settling in the workshop walls, contracting in the cold night air. Tomorrow would bring the marshal or Morrison or both. But something else nagged at her awareness. The dates in the ledger, Elizabeth's payments stopping 2 days before her death, but Morrison's special orders continuing after. Handled by someone else, someone still in town, still processing girls through the auction. Sarah sat up, grabbed the ledger from the table where Thomas had set it, flipped to the weeks after Elizabeth's death. The handwriting in the margins changed. Not the drunk bookkeeper's scrawl. Neat copperplate script. Formal. Educated. She'd seen that handwriting before, on the auction registration form, the one she'd signed 3 months ago. The auctioneer. He'd taken over Elizabeth's role, was still taking it. Next week's auction would happen regardless of Morrison's fate, unless someone stopped it at the source. The marshal never came. Mr. Kowalski returned 3 days later, horse lathered with dried sweat. The Denver office had bigger concerns, railroad workers rioting over wages, 2 banks robbed in a week, a few missing girls from a mountain town didn't warrant the ride. Sarah stood in the workshop, planing cedar boards for Jenny's first project, a simple box, corners exposed to show mistakes. The girl's hands shook less each day, though she still jumped when horses passed on the road. Morrison's gone, Kowalski reported. Left on the midnight train. House shuttered, bank position vacant. Thomas didn't look up from his work. The sheriff, still wearing the badge, says Morrison deceived him too. Sarah set down the plane. Through the window, she watched Jenny splitting kindling in the yard. The girl had gained weight in 3 weeks. Mrs. Chen brought food daily, claiming excess from the laundry's boarding customers. The auctioneer, Sarah asked. Kowalski's face darkened. Perkins. Still there. Announced next month's auction yesterday. Sarah's hands found the ledger on the workbench, the copperplate handwriting in the margins, taking over where Elizabeth stopped, recording girls' names like inventory. Not for long, she said. That afternoon, 3 letters arrived with the supply wagon. Sarah recognized the Denver postmark, the quality paper. She opened them at her desk while Thomas worked and Jenny practiced dovetail joints. The first from Hartman and Associates, furniture makers, offering position as lead craftsman, $60 monthly, include room and board. The second from Colorado Springs Seminary, need woodworking instructor for young ladies. Respectable position, good society, $40 monthly. The third had no return address. Inside, Morrison's business card and a note. Opportunities exist for those who know when to be quiet. 100 monthly. Details upon acceptance. Sarah fed all 3 letters to the stove. The paper curled black. Morrison's card last to burn. Thomas watched from his bench, saying nothing. "Jenny," Sarah called. "Come here." The girl set down her chisel. Wood shavings in her hair, sawdust on the borrowed pants. She moved different now, purposeful instead of frightened. Sarah pulled out a different paper. The deed she'd filed 2 weeks ago. Paid with her saved wages. 40 acres adjoining this camp. Bought it yesterday. Jenny's eyes widened. Why? Workshop expansion. Teaching space. Maybe a proper showroom? Sarah traced the property lines on the survey map. Need someone to manage the books when it's built. I don't know enough yet. You will. Thomas joined them at the desk. Studied the survey map, measuring distances with his thumb. Lot of clearing needed. Granite ledge runs through the middle. Granite's good foundation, Sarah said. Build around what can't be moved. He traced a different line. Creek access here. Could power a mill wheel. For what? Mechanized saw. Like the ones in Denver. 10 times the cutting speed. Sarah pulled out pencil and paper. Started sketching rough plans. Thomas added notes drainage here. Road access there. Jenny watched them work. 2 hands drawing one vision. The auction, Jenny said suddenly. It's tomorrow. Sarah's pencil stilled. Tomorrow, 3 girls registered. Their mothers too poor or powerless to resist. We could stop it, Jenny said. How? Thomas asked. Sheriff won't help. Marshal won't come. Sarah stood, walked to her carved box on the shelf, opened it. Inside, beyond the telegram receipts, lay something else. A 27-cent piece. Copper. Worn. Dated 1876. She'd found it in the platform's crack that day. Kept it as reminder. We buy them out. Thomas's eyebrows raised. All three. Fair wage employment. Same as Jenny. Sarah pulled out her account book. 3 months of wages saved, plus commissions from private sales. I have enough. That's your land payment money. Land can wait. But Thomas was already pulling out his own ledger. Camp made good profit this month. Could advance wages against future work. Jenny ran to the cabin, returned with a flour sack. Coins rattled inside. My mother's emergency fund. She hid it from Papa. Told me to use it when ready. They counted together. Silver dollars, half dollars, quarters, even copper pennies, green with age, enough to make legitimate employment offers that would exceed any auction bid. But Perkins, Thomas said, he'll just register more girls next month. Sarah picked up the ledger with the copper plate evidence. Not if he's in territorial prison. She spent that night writing. Not copies this time, sworn affidavit. Every transaction documented, cross-referenced with shipping records. Jenny helped, her young eyes better in lamplight. Thomas prepared the wagon, checked the wheel hubs, greased the axles. Before dawn, they rode to town. Sarah on the bench beside Thomas, Jenny in the wagon bed with the money sacks. The road frozen hard, wagon wheels barely leaving tracks. Town looked different in pre-dawn darkness. Windows dark, chimneys cold. Only the bakery showed light. First loaves rising. They stopped at the courthouse. Sarah slid the affidavit under the judge's door, Judge Carlton. Brought in from Denver last month, Outside Morrison's influence. The auction platform stood in the square. Same boards where Sarah had stood, valued at 27 cents. Thomas climbed up, walked to the center, bent down, pulled something from between boards. A coin. Another 27-cent piece, wedged in the same crack. He handed it to Sarah. For luck. For remembering. The sun rose as townspeople gathered. The auctioneer Perkins arrived in his black coat, ledger under his arm. Stopped when he saw Thomas on the platform. "This is official town business. Read." "So is this." Sarah held up the affidavit copy. "Judge Carlton has the original. Details about special orders. Trafficking arrangements. Your signature on everyone." Perkins went white. His ledger slipped. Hit the platform with a sound like struck wood. "You can't prove Elizabeth Reed's letters," Thomas said quietly. "She wrote everything down. Names, dates, amounts, even how you forced her to help. A lie. Elizabeth's letters spoke only of pain in circles traced on quilts. But Perkins didn't know that. The crowd gathered thick now. Mrs. Henderson in front, fan fluttering. Sheriff Watson at the edge, hand nervous on his pistol. The three registered girls with their mothers, holding each other. "Run," Sarah told Perkins. "Take the morning train, or stay and explain to the judge." Perkins looked between them. Sarah with her evidence, Thomas with his quiet threat, Jenny standing witness to what such auctions cost. He grabbed his ledger, pushed through the crowd, boot falls fading fast toward the train depot. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. "Can't have an auction without an auctioneer." "Good," Sarah said. She climbed onto the platform, pulled out the employment contracts she'd written. Fair wages, room and board, teaching positions at the expanded workshop. "Anyone interested in honest work, see me." The three girls came forward, their mothers behind, tears cutting channels through powder. Sarah signed contracts, handed over advance wages. The platform that had sold women now freed them. Mrs. Henderson pushed forward. "This is irregular. These auctions are town tradition. Traditions change." Sarah stepped down from the platform. "Or towns die." The crowd dispersed, some angry, some thoughtful. The three new employees, Mary, Agnes, and Ruth, climbed into Thomas's wagon. Their mothers walked alongside, touching their daughters' hands like making sure they were real. At the camp, Sarah showed them the expansion plans. The building sites, the creek that would power machinery. Their eyes went wide at the scale of it. "But we don't know anything," Ruth said, youngest at 14. "You'll learn." Sarah put them to work immediately. Mary on inventory, Agnes on tools, Ruth helping Jenny with basic cuts. The workshop filled with voices for the first time, questions, laughter, even singing as they found rhythm in the work. Thomas built additional cabins, simple structures but solid doors that locked, windows that opened, stoves that drew proper. Each girl got her own space, own key. The camp expanding into something more than business, almost community. December brought snow. The workshop stayed warm, 4 stoves now burning. Orders backed up until February. Word spread about the women carpenters, novelty becoming reputation as their work proved true. Sarah stood at her expanded workbench, carving detail into a cabinet door, cherry wood, commissioned by the new bank president from Denver, her maker's mark hidden in the grain pattern, visible only if you knew where to look. Thomas worked beside her, 10 feet away at his own bench, not talking, just matching rhythms, the rasp of her chisel, the whisper of his plane, symphony without music. Through the window, she watched the girls hauling lumber from the seasoning shed, Jenny directing, confident now in her knowledge, Ruth singing something Irish, voice carrying clear in cold air. "Letter came," Thomas said. Sarah didn't look up. Another offer, probably. They came weekly now, Denver, San Francisco, even Chicago. Museums wanting her work, schools wanting her teaching. "Where from?" "Town council." That made her look. Thomas held out the paper, official seal visible. She read it quick, set it down, went back to carving. They want to hire us, make town furniture for the new courthouse. Us, Reed and Mitchell, fine woodworking. Thomas pulled out a business card, freshly printed, both names equal-sized. If you're interested. Sarah set down her chisel, looked at the card, at the workshop full of working women, at the expansion plans tacked to the wall, at Thomas, waiting patient for her answer. She'd been worth 27 cents once. Now she was worth whatever she decided. I'm interested. Thomas nodded, went back to his plane. Sarah returned to her carving, the workshop filled with sound saws and sanders, hammers and voices. Outside, snow began falling, soft as sawdust. Mrs. Garrett visited that afternoon, bringing preserves and news. Morrison had been arrested in Denver, fraud charges filed. The sheriff had resigned, moved to California. Judge Carlton had outlawed person auctions, called them unconscionable commerce in human dignity. You changed things, Mrs. Garrett said. Sarah looked at her bandaged hands, scars layered on scars, each one earned. Things were ready to change. That evening, after the girls returned to their cabins, Sarah and Thomas worked alone, 2 lanterns burning his trimmed high for detail, hers low for finishing, the sound of sandpaper on wood like whispered conversation. Elizabeth would have liked this, Thomas said suddenly, first time he'd mentioned her unprompted. The workshop. The choosing. Having choices. Sarah set down her sandpaper. Through the window, the old auction platform's location showed as disturbed snow. They'd torn it down last week, used the lumber for cabin floors. We all would have liked choices. Thomas walked to her bench, studied the cabinet door she'd been carving. Roses and thorns twisted together, beautiful and dangerous both. You could go. Those offers from Denver, San Francisco, better money, easier life. Could, but won't. Sarah ran her finger along the carved thorns, each sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't careful. I know what this is, what we're building. Worth more than money. What is it? She looked at him, gray eyes in lamplight, patient as seasoned wood, place where worth isn't measured in coins. He reached past her, picked up fine grit sandpaper, started working the carved roses, bringing out the grain. Their hands moved parallel, not touching but aware. Stay then, build it complete. Not a question, not quite invitation. Something between acknowledgement of choice made and welcomed. Sarah picked up her chisel again, started carving leaves around the roses, each cut deliberate, revealing what the wood had always contained. I already bought the land, might as well use it. Thomas almost smiled, the expression rare enough to be remarkable. They worked until the lanterns burned low, until their shadows merged on the workshop wall. Outside, snow continued falling. The new cabin stood solid against weather. 4 young women slept safe behind doors they controlled. The town below adjusted to new realities, traditions breaking like ice in spring. Sarah finished the last leaf as the lantern died. In darkness, she heard Thomas banking the stove, routine as breathing, heard him walk to his back room, door closing soft. She remained at the bench, fingers tracing the carving she could no longer see. Tomorrow would bring more work orders to fill, skills to teach, structures to build. A life chosen, not auctioned. Through the window, stars emerged between clouds, the old platform's location now covered complete with snow, erasure finished by weather. Sarah walked to her own room she'd built it herself last month, addition to the workshop's north side. Her own door, her own key, her own space earned through bleeding hands and held breath concentration. On her desk lay the 2 27-cent pieces, copper worn smooth, dates barely visible. She picked them up, weighed them against her palm. Such small things to mark such large changes. She opened her window despite the cold, threw both coins out into the snow, let them disappear into the white that covered everything equal the ground where the platform stood, the earth where new foundations would rise. Worth more than 27 cents now, worth exactly what she'd built herself to be. The window closed against winter. Sarah lit her own lantern, trimmed the wick precise. At her desk, she opened tomorrow's orders, calculated board feet, figured costs, planned cuts to minimize waste. The numbers clear as wood grain, the future measured in her own accounting. Years later, when young women arrived at our workshop doors, some running from debts, others from worse, I'd show them the scar across my left palm, the deep one from my first week with the spokes have, when I didn't know how to hold anything without fighting it. They always asked if Thomas taught me patience. I'd tell them no. Wood taught me patience. Thomas taught me that worth isn't granted by others, it's built with your own bleeding hands. One board at a time. The Reed and Mitchell workshop stands larger now. 12 workbenches, 3 mechanical saws. Contracts from Denver to San Francisco. Jenny runs the business side, those ledgers she learned on still precise as prayer. The other girls' women now, some stayed, some left for their own shops. All carry their maker's marks, hidden but permanent. Thomas and I work the same bench now, different ends. Neither of us mentions the marriage certificate filed with Judge Carlton last spring. Some things don't need announcing, like good joinery. They're stronger for being invisible. The 27 cents. Still out there under snow somewhere. Every spring, I think about looking, never do. Some reminders are better left buried, their weight transformed into what we chose to build instead. Disclaimer. This is a work of fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. The story does not condone, promote, or encourage any form of violence, human trafficking, or harmful behavior of any kind. All characters and events depicted are entirely products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The historical setting serves narrative purposes only and should not be interpreted as historically accurate. This story aims to explore themes of human dignity, resilience, and redemption through entirely fictional circumstances and should be read as creative fiction alone.